Fantastic. Well, we have over 100 people with us this afternoon, so we're going to jump in and get started. My name is Alex Worth, and I'm the co-founder and CEO of Quorum, and really excited to spend some time today on the subject of measuring the return on investment of corporate government affairs. This is a topic that I hear quite frequently as a challenge for many, and that I don't think the industry has completely figured out. And what I'm going to aim to do today in this presentation is give you 5 different ways that you could go about it that are taken from some of both our current clients as well as people that we know in the market that are corporations that have done a really good job of being able to measure the return on investment of their government affairs efforts. So the reason why we're talking about this now is that we've heard from many of you that as a result of COVID-19, many organizations are beginning to revisit their budgets, both as it applies to what they currently spend in their government affairs budget, but also more significantly across the entire corporate entity. And what that means is that it's going to be even more necessary for government affairs teams to prove their return on investment, both this year and in future years, because not only is it a key way to make sure that you get resources, but also it's a wonderful way to make sure that you've got the opportunity to possibly even expand resources as we see even more of a need for government affairs in these very unique times. Want to open it up here, and of course the challenge is finding metrics that are both informative and actionable, and that's what we're going to talk about today. Want to open it up for a quick poll for everyone. So I think my team's going to have this appear live and it's going to pop up on your screen. But the question for you today is, how has your relationship with the C-suite or the executive team changed during this pandemic? So for some of those, are you increasing, as in they're very invested in your lobbying work? Is it about the same? Or is it decreasing and that the business is working on other items other than government affairs? So we're going to give it just a minute as the numbers are skyrocketing up in terms of the percentage of you that have voted. Awesome. We are 2 people away from 100 folks having shared, but the end results here are over 101 now. Love to see that. So 50% of you say that the involvement from your C-suite is increasing. 35% say it's about the same, and only 15% say it's decreasing. So that just confirms the theory that we have heard from many of you already, that the importance of government affairs is more than ever. And also people are looking to see, okay, what actually is the government affairs team doing on a daily basis, and how are you proving a return on investment for the organization? So we're going to talk about 5 different ways today of proving return on investment in government affairs. And in making this presentation, what I did was sat down and say, okay, what are all the different ways that I have seen across our multitude of clients that people have actually gone and brought metrics to their C-suite saying, this is what we're doing on a daily basis. And the goal of this being is that you could end up using all of them, or you could decide that just one of them is most important and most relevant to you all. So we'll talk a little bit about peer dollars and cents. We'll talk about legislative outcomes, stakeholder scoring, using smart meeting tracking with data, and then looking at a correlation between engagement and legislative activity. And hopefully you'll walk away with a bigger and broader understanding of what are some of the different opportunities that your team could use to measure the return on investment of government affairs. So without much further ado, we should just jump right in here. And the first strategy is the one that probably makes the most sense. And that is that if you can simply put a dollar number on it, you can go back to the business and say, well, we saved you X or Y amount of money, or we created X or Y amount of market opportunity. 2 different case studies on how I've seen this done that I think are truly best in class and cutting edge. The first of those comes from a small Fortune 500 global manufacturing company. And they actually have an Excel model that has all of their products and how many of those products they sell. And whenever an issue comes up, they have set internally a specific amount that they are willing to spend to fight that issue. It's in the tune of less than 5% of the total global revenue from that product. But if they're able to say, hey, we have a new tariff, and this tariff could mean that this part's going to get X more expensive, and that could then mean that it would impact the revenue of Y product that we are able to sell for, Z profit or revenue, then we're willing to spend a percentage on that, on making sure that we don't have that tariff go into place, or trying to fight whatever the issue may be to get an outcome changed. And for them, what it has allowed them to do is have a really clear alignment with the business and business leaders, where their executives say, yep, we get it. We are willing to spend a small percentage of the total risk, making sure that our government affairs team is really active and engaged and proactive. And second, when an issue comes up, say whether it might be a stimulus bill around COVID or a tax reform bill or a new tariff, they immediately know how much money that they are going to have to be able to go to deploy, and can work much faster than other entities. So obviously this requires you to have a fair amount of collaboration with the business, and also a lot of business information, and be able to very quickly estimate the potential impact that something might have. It's cutting edge in that they had it for all of their products, and so could very quickly do that. But realize that oftentimes it gets a lot more complicated. So the second kind of flavor of this same one, looking at dollars and cents, is from a Fortune 100 retailer. And I've heard this model used a couple of times. And what they do is they work with the business. And when the business comes to them with a problem, they turn around and say, okay, well, if we were to go ahead and actually enact this individual bill, pass a new piece of legislation, or stop this, what's the business impact that that would have on you? And the business would come back and say, well, that would save us $16 million. And their government affairs team would turn around and say, okay, well, how much are you willing to spend to prevent that from happening? And their business unit would say, well, we'd actually be willing to spend $4 million. And the government affairs team would then return and say, well, great, we'll take your $4 million and we will run you the best ground campaign we possibly can, or the best advocacy campaign. And we'll go either prevent a bill from passing, or pass a new bill, or stop a tariff or an item that might come up. And this, I think, is really kind of probably the easiest that you could bring to your organization if you were looking to really embrace pure dollar metrics on it, is going back to the business unit, asking, okay, how much does it cost? And then the really advanced one is turning around and getting the business unit to actually come and share with you and be able to say, all right, well, are you willing to ship and put money in? And what's interesting is that two companies that I know that do this have two of the largest government affairs teams in the industry. And the reason for that is that they're able to get not only the money the CEO gives them to do government affairs, but they're actually able to get money from their business units to go achieve outcomes. And the business units go, thank you for that. You guys were super helpful. It was amazing return on investment that we could put in $4 million, and you were able to do a policy change that's let us made $16 million this year, let alone to millions down the road. So that's the first one. Yeah, super simple, just pure dollars and cents. Being able to put it involves a really close collaboration with the business unit. I'm going to go ahead and go through all 5 of them. But as a reminder, at the bottom of your screen, there's a little Q&A tab. And if you click Q&A, you can put in any questions that you have about any of these that come up. And we'll make sure to answer those at the end as we keep going here. But obviously, one of the things that I consistently hear from our clients is that it's always not necessarily that simple, where you can't just go to the business unit and have them tell you how much a policy costs, or the business is so big you don't know who to talk to, or you have so many different business units that you could spend your entire time talking to business units. And that's where the rest of these strategies are focused, are what are things in your control that you can begin thinking about measuring and using to prove the own return on investment of your team. So the strategy 2 here is looking at the rate of preferred legislative outcomes. And the idea on this is that when you're going in, you're working on moving different pieces of legislation, different regulations, different tariffs. And so it's a fairly simple approach to be able to look at what is your success rate on those individual legislative items that you're working on, and then being able to break that down in a wide variety of different ways. So one of the easiest ways is just simply, okay, take the number of bills that you worked on in 2019. How many of those bills did you oppose? How many of those bills did you support? And how many were you just watching? And what happened to those bills over time? And then you can put together a presentation like you see over here on the right-hand side that you would be able to present to your executives to show the impact and work of your team looking at outcomes. So first, on the bills that you oppose, 68 of them. At the end of the year, 69% of those bills failed, so total 47, and 31% passed. So in this case, you're able to tell your executives, hey, the vast majority of the bills that we opposed, we made sure failed. And you can begin to look at this number year over year as a metric of, all right, was your team doing something different? Did you expand the team, different strategy? Were you able to get more bills failed than previously, or more bills passed if you wanted the bill to be passed? Or are you seeing different headwinds out in the world that is causing one way or another and leading them to spend much more time in terms of engaging, or is causing much more of opposition to your given legislative strategy? So here's opposed. You can do the same thing for supported. And then a really interesting one is to take those same things and break it down by issue area. So your bills should either be automatically tagged by issue area, depending on what system you're using, or you have the ability to go through and manually tag them. And then you can start looking at successes and failures by issue area. And these are the type of metrics that executives love, because they can immediately start to see, okay, where are we having a lot of success and where aren't we doing as well? So in our hypothetical company here, trade really not working so well. 78% of the legislative outcomes they were working on were all failures. Labor was more of a success. 65% of the legislative outcomes were successful, and energy was about split, 46-54. So very quickly you can look at this and say, hey, we're not doing so hot on trade. We're doing really well when it comes to labor, but energy issues are still in the middle. And again, what gets really interesting here is when you're able to begin to look year over year and see how this is changing. So maybe trade is just a 2019 thing, different administration, different approach, and it used to be much better earlier, or it is something dramatically that's changed with energy, where energy prices have dropped. And so maybe that's why you aren't being as successful as you used to be. But this starts to give the same type of business metrics that an executive is going to look from other parts of their business, whether it's finance, sales, or marketing, and be able to give you much more information and feedback, and also really appreciate that you are working to prove the return on investment of your work. So again, this is looking at it by year. And that brings us to the end of question 2. So usually in person, I would stop here and say any questions. But again, as a reminder, bottom of your screen in Q&A, certainly would love any questions that you have about these, and we'll dive into those at the end. Strategy 3 is one of my personal favorites, because I think it is not only a good best practice for government affairs and working on outreach, but also is an awesome way to be able to prove the work that your team does day in and day out. And what that is stakeholder scoring. The idea being that government affairs at the end of the day is a relationships game. And part of the reason why you have significant government affairs teams is to make sure that you have strong relationships with your stakeholders. Well, that can be sometimes difficult to be able to quantify. And if you're an executive, you might be sitting there wondering, all right, I have this whole government affairs team. What are they doing on a daily basis? They go to all these meetings, these conferences, they're on the Hill, they're at events. Is it actually making a difference? And this is one of my favorite ways of being able to really clearly say, here's exactly the work that we're doing every single day. So 2 different ways to do it. The first one is the one that I recommend the most. And that is establishing a tier system that is descriptive. So a key best practice is using a description for tiers, because no one's going to remember what is tier 1, tier 2, tier 3 off the top of their head. And so the one that I encourage you to use would say, knows our team, knows our issues, is supportive of our issues, and willing to take action on our behalf. And the idea being that on that case, you can actually move people up different tiers. And so in that way, you start and say, hey, we've got a brand new Congress coming here in 2021. We have 100 new members. How many of them even know a member of our team? And to be expecting, everyone knows that probably the answer would be very few, unless you're doing a big elections outreach program. But coming in and being able to say, well, in the first quarter of 2021, we made sure that all 100 members of Congress know who the point person is from our team. And then in Q2, it is that, hey, we made an effort to go in and brief each of those members of Congress so they know what the issues are that are most important to our company. And then the third follow-up from that would be, okay, of those 100 members of Congress we briefed, we've determined through continued conversations and engagement that 50 of those would actually be supportive of the issues that we're working on, and supportive of those issues. And then finally, as it comes to Q4 and the end of the year, all right, of those 50 that are supportive of the issues, 25 are actually willing to take action on our behalf. And if we could go and pick up the phone, they would answer our call. So it's a really excellent way to be able to do a tiered system and move through that engagement ladder. And the best part of this is that it can apply to any stakeholder. So if you're working on reporters, you can use it for reporters. If it's members of Congress, if it's staff, if it's regulators, if it's the executive branch in the White House, you can use it however you want and be able to quantify exactly, okay, here's the work as we've moved people through. The second one to talk about is looking at individuals as, are they champions, are they neutral, or are they detractors? And using both a quantitative or a qualitative methodology to put people in those different cases. And so this example comes from a Fortune 100 company that we work with that implemented this. And the following slides are something that they use to actually present to their senior executive team on how they were able to move the needle from people from detractors to neutral, neutral to champions. Obviously, we've changed all the metrics associated with it, removed all the branding, but it can give you a little bit of a sense of the ability of how stakeholder scoring can be helpful to you as you're moving people up an engagement ladder. So to dive in, they first took it, all right, beginning of 2019, where were they at? They start by identifying the stakeholders that matter the most. And what they found is that, hypothetically in this example, because again, we've changed the numbers, 42 people are detractors, 158 for neutral, and 53 were champions of the work that they're doing. And by the end of 2019, when they resurveyed and their team on where those individuals stood of those 200 or so plus folks, they had 24 detractors, 84 who were neutral, and 145 who were champions. So even just pausing right here, big win for the team. Look at those numbers and people moving up and thinking more positively about the organization. But the really interesting piece of it is when you can actually dive into, well, what happened to those 42 detractors that were at the beginning of 2019? Well, the team's work in this case, 17 of those stayed detractors. Not everyone's going to come around. Not everyone's going to be a champion with your organization. But 18 of them, they were able to move to neutral. So at least get them to say, okay, I'm going to think a little more positively. Thank you for educating me and looking at this a different way. And 7 of the detractors, they were actually able to get to move to champions who really appreciated the outreach engagement and learned more about the company and the company's efforts in a new way. Of those that were neutral, 57 stayed neutral. Again, not everyone's going to be, super excited. 7 of those moved to detractors, so not so great. Might be worth digging in there on, hey, what happened to those folks? Like, why? Probably something to learn from. But the big story and takeaway of 94 people who were neutral moved to champions. Why is that? Well, likely it was because of the work of the team reaching out and working to make sure that those people knew who the team was, knew the good things the company was doing, and also understood that the issues that they cared about. And so able to move those folks from neutral to champions. And then, of course, of champions, 91% stayed champions. Couple folks moved to neutral. This could just be a scoring error where when you start 2019, you say they're a champion, and then you go meet with them and go, well, actually, they're a little more neutral. And then 0% moved to detractors. And for the executives at this company, they were blown away by this, said, we've never seen this before. And it now actually enables us to be able to quantify the efforts that we're doing when it comes to reaching out to stakeholders and looking at our investment in government and public affairs a whole new way because of the ability to really move the needle when it comes to stakeholder scoring. So same old reminder, bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A. Feel free to put in any questions that you've got on that methodology of stakeholder scoring. I've also got a blog post on it that's available on the website. So you're welcome to reach out to a member of our team or search for it. If you just put in knows our team, stakeholder scoring, Alex Worth, we put together a whole series of resources on thinking about how you might approach it. And the best part of it is obviously you can do it with the system, but you also could just simply do it in Excel if you wanted to bring a lot more of work and metrics to your organization. So 2 more to go here. Strategy 4 is meeting tracking with data. And really important, the with data part. Because forever people have looked at meeting tracking and said, oh, well, I don't want to do meeting tracking, or meeting tracking isn't a good metric because the number of meetings I have with someone isn't purely the reason of how successful I am on a day-to-day basis. And that's a big reason why we put this as 4. Obviously, it is a really helpful metric to be able to bring in. And if you can add actual additional data to it, you can start to improve return on investment in a whole new way than just purely number of meetings. So a couple ways to break it down. 1, highly encourage that anytime you're logging and tracking your meetings, you're associating the issues that you met about. And so you can then get a bar chart like this at the end of a given period whether it's a quarter, 6 months, or a year, and say, okay, here's where the focus of our team went. We did the majority of our meetings on energy issues because that was the hot topic of the year, whereas health wasn't a big priority. Now you can imagine 2020 might be the opposite. The majority of the meetings might be on health, and then fewer down, maybe say on energy or labor or whatever it may be. A really interesting case study comes from a client of ours who went and took their CEO's priority list for the year. And the CEO had 5 priorities for the whole organization. And they put those in as the issues. And they were able to go back to the CEO at the end of the year and report and say, here's the number of meetings that we did on each of your priority issues. And as you can imagine, it matched perfectly 1 through 5 of their priority, where his number 1 priority is what they did the most meetings on. And that CEO looks and says, thank you, government affairs team, for clearly watching what's happening with the company and making sure that you're moving forward on what's going on with the company's issues. And that provides another metric and an opportunity to prove return on investment that an executive looks at and goes, that's a worthwhile investment. I want to keep doing it. Second piece of it is you can look and be able to see, okay, who's logged the most meetings with stakeholders? So obviously realize that just the total number of meetings done, again, is not the only and perfect way of doing it. But starting to look at and get some insights across your team of who are the people that are out and are super active. In this case, Bethany Fox on our team, 340 interactions. What is it that's causing her to do so many interactions with legislators? Is she going on staff delegations? Is she always on the Hill? Is it that she's ending up going to a lot of fundraisers? What is it in particular that's making her so successful out there? And then also identifies opportunities on your team where there might be areas for improvement. So you might look at, Madison Boggs on her team, only 190. Question being, is that because she had a more specific group of people she was reaching out to, or a larger number working to engage with? And so one of the things that we'll see companies do is set the target list of here are the 100 most important people that matter to them, or 200 state legislators, and then really make an effort that their team is going out and actively staying in touch with those folks. And if you're assigned 75 individuals, it wouldn't be unreasonable to say, hey, I want you to find 3 touch points with them a year. Suddenly with that, 3 times 75, that's 225 engagement opportunities in any way, shape, or form. Maybe NCSL, maybe Senate President's Forum, maybe a meeting in the state capitol. But then you know that your team has been present with those individuals and is building strong relationships that hopefully you can use at a later date. You combine this with a stakeholder scoring mechanism, and you can actually see, okay, are all these meetings that are happening moving the needle and moving people up an engagement ladder? And then this is a fascinating breakdown that you also can do with meeting tracking when you're incorporating the right data is, okay, who did you meet with the most? And one of the interesting pieces of this always starts to come down of saying, all right, at the end of the year, here are all of our tier 1 stakeholders. And then looking at the end of the year and saying, all right, did we actually meet with our tier 1 stakeholders? Or is it that we're meeting with more people either because they really like us or because we have relationships, and starting to dive into making sure that you're meeting with those individuals that you might either have a facility in their district, sit on the key committees, or you want to have a relationship with. And this goes back to a little bit of the best practice that I talked about of if you can take every congressional leader or every state legislative leader and say, I want to make sure that we meet with them a certain number of times a year, and then go in and check and make sure that they were actually met with a certain number of times a year. That provides you an opportunity to ensure return on investment and make sure relationships are there so that you don't have a moment that some did when COVID-19 happened. Everyone was working remotely and it goes, wait a minute, who has the legislative director's cell phone number? We don't have the LD's cell phone number. That's a problem. And then therefore, we're locked out of some key part of the COVID-19 response bill. So really strong opportunity to make sure that your relationships are covered with meeting tracking. And then I think this is the last one here, but it's just quickly diving into, was a meeting positive, neutral, or negative? And so in this case, is be able to say, hey, were we being received really well on the Hill? Were we not being received as well? Or was this one that was just neutral? And you can start to do really interesting, looks at the data where you can say, okay, when we look at positive meetings, who are they with? Or when we break down all the times we met with Senator Markey, were most of them positive or most of them neutral? Were some negative? And you could even do fascinating data analyses where you bring all your stakeholders together and then look at the percentage of positive, neutral, and negative meetings that happen and come up. So a quick case study here that we can talk about that we're actually just released, which is how S&P Global measures the ROI of government affairs with quorum. So this is live on our website, really interesting read, but what they do is they have every one of their government affairs team members log every interaction into the quorum system. So that might be a meeting, phone call, emails, events, and they tag that meeting note with the issue and a quality score based on the stakeholders' level of influence and the stakeholders' level of support for the issue. They're able to document any necessary follow-up, notify team members by saying, at Satya, I want to make sure that you have a chance to follow up on this. And then what they're able to do is on the back end, quickly go and build reports for executives in a matter of minutes that give you some of the reports that we've shown earlier in this presentation, where they can say, here's the exact return on investment. And what's really interesting is when you talk with Darlene, their global head of government affairs, there's the opportunity to make this so incredibly easy by putting it in the specific mobile app and then being able to pull the reporting. And we did a whole webinar talking about managing during COVID, but she talked a little bit about this. And I think the interesting takeaway is that the rest of the business unit really appreciates the metrics, because everywhere else, everyone's focused on KPIs. Is manufacturing going on time? Did we get the deliveries out? Are our customers happy? And so for Darlene and her team at S&P Global, they're able to bring similar metrics and say, yes, boss, we're focused on the same metrics that are happening. And we're able to show you how we're moving the needle on this and do it in a really, really seamless way. So would encourage you to take a look at that case study. Really fascinating in terms of diving in on how this actually looks like in practice with S&P Global. Last one to talk about today is a really fun one. And this is kind of the advanced also put at the end, because I think a lot more of this is looking at, okay, you've got this information, you have the basic level, where can you go with it? And that's looking at the correlation between engagement and legislative activity. So if you're putting all your meetings in, what you can start to do is get a really interesting scatter plot where you're able to say, okay, we're doing these engagements, and then are they actually leading to a specific outcome? And we had a client of ours outside of the corporate space who did a really interesting experiment where they split the freshman class into two groups. One was a control group and one was an advocacy group. And they made an effort to go and do advocacy to the people that were in their advocacy group and get them to sign on to bills, make statements on the floor, make tweets, press releases. And then they wanted to look at and be able to see, does advocacy really make a difference? And they were able to prove that the individuals who they advocated for actually were much more active and supportive on their issues, more vocal on their issues, more likely to sign on to a bill than those that they didn't. And you can create, and they did using the quorum system, a scatter plot like the one below that essentially is, okay, the number of engagements down here on the x-axis, and then their individual score, which they created, which you can look at sponsorships times the number of times they voted on an issue times the number of statements they might have made, and look at the two compared. Or you can simply just say, okay, of the number of times that we engaged with official, did they talk about our company more? Or did they talk about our issues more? And this brings back all the metrics that we were talking about earlier to really drive in, great, you've got a positive relationship with the legislator or you met with them a lot. But at the end of the day, did it move to the legislative outcome that you were looking for? And being able to very clearly show back to your team that here's the engagement efforts that we did, and here's exactly how these members of Congress responded, and painting a picture of that. And that is kind of the most full circle that you're able to do from beginning to end of really being able to dive in and say, okay, here is the impact of our work on a daily basis. So that brings me to the end of the 5 strategies that we have seen put into practice in the market. Obviously, there's a lot of different options here. And so the goal being that you, hopefully from this, you might find one that you go, hey, I want to learn more about that, or I could see that working at our organization. Because I think the nice thing about government affairs is there's not one right answer that maybe the finance or the sales or the marketing team has where you have to do it this way. But rather, this is really the cutting edge of the field where people are figuring out what's the best way to do this. And so I would encourage you to begin to think about, okay, what are ways that you can bring this to your organization? And obviously, our team is more than happy to take time and talk with you about what that might look like in more of a personal consultation. So with that, I want to open it up to Q&A. As a reminder here, down the bottom left with the chat box, you can submit your own Q&A question. And I'm going to stop screen sharing here for a minute so I can pull up Q&A. So the first question, which is an easy one, we'll be able to get this presentation or slide deck emailed to us after it's over. Somebody has another call at 1:30. The question to that is absolutely yes. We'll do a quick poll at the end, and we asked if you will just fill that out. We'll send the slide deck right over. So we'll make sure that we do that. You can also reach out to our team, info@quorum.us, or on the website, and we can make sure to get that. Second question is, in scoring 2, how do you score champion, neutral, detractor when they're all of those on different issues? So really great question here, and that's diving into the weeds on it. I have seen it done two ways. One, people look more broadly at, okay, how are they thinking about the business? And so are they a champion, neutral, detractor on the business? And in that case, if the business could be a little bit more paralyzing, or somebody goes, I'm never talked to X company, I'm never going to work with you, then very clearly be able to say, here's champion, neutral, detractor. You can also pull it out on individual issues. So you could score them if you wanted to on 10 different issues. And then you can begin to actually create macro scores while saying the majority of the time are they a champion, or just some of the time, they're neutral or detractor. And so you can then essentially get a quote unquote super score, which gives you the ability to look at it across a multitude of different issues. Third question that we also got, can we get a copy of the presentation? Again, most certainly we'll ask you to fill out a poll at the end, so happy to do that. Fourth question is, do you judge the difference between becoming a pest versus real quality meetings? Yeah, so this is the key one of being able to dive in and say, if you have too many meetings, you're not going to be successful. Like if you're in the office every single week and you don't have a pure reason to be there, absolutely, it's going to be a little bit more on the pest side versus the quality of meeting. But what I think happens more often than not is that you have to focus on doing meetings with a wide number of officials and thinking about really quantity and quality spread across a wide number rather than massive quantity with one set of individuals. And so what I see happen more often than not with our clients is people will have a tier 1 list or say every speaker is really important, but then there's no way that you're actually going in and tracking and making sure you're following up with every single speaker. And so what I would really encourage you to do is set a very low goal for the number of meetings so you're not a pest. Say 3, 5, a max of 12 once a month. But even that might be a little bit high. And then making basically an effort there to be able to go and one by one reach out to those individuals and do an introduction meeting, have a follow-up so they know who you are, and then actually be able to have some substantive conversations on your issue so that before something major comes up and they're considering shutting down your industry if it's COVID or passing a major tax bill, you actually have a relationship built that's proactive. And that's where I think beginning to just look at the number of meetings can start to be helpful. Next question, on the staff bar graph, is this a list of all activities or specific? So I'm not sure exactly the bar graph that you're referring to here. Oh, I guess this is looking at meetings and across the team, all activities specific. So here's the best part about all of this is that it's completely customizable. And in that case, you could begin to say, well, I only want to look at who's doing a lot of phone calls, or I only want to look at who's doing a lot of conference engagement, or I'm only interested in looking at where we have super strong relationships where legislators are willing to take action on our behalf. Or maybe it's totally different and you want to use different qualitative scores. So instead of knows our team, knows our issues, you want to do something that, knows, X member of your team, a lot of different ways to look at it. And that's where, in however you set this up, using whatever system, you should make sure that it's got the customization so that you can set it up any way you want. And really, this goal is an opportunity to be able to give you an example of what you might be looking at, but realizing that you've got a lot of flexibility here. Next question, any application for the Canadian market? Absolutely. So as I mentioned earlier, the really cool thing about this is it works for any stakeholder. So as you think about meetings, as you think about engagement versus mentions, as you think about stakeholder scoring, the only one that doesn't really work is legislative outcomes, but is really tying it in that you can make this work for Canadian members of parliament, you can make it work for folks in the European Union, or you can make it work for academics, NGOs, nonprofits, stakeholders. And it's interesting because where we started as a company with Quorum was solely focused on members of Congress and Capitol Hill. And what we heard from our clients was, hey, this is great, the relationship work that you're doing here. Now we want to do state legislative tracking. Now we want to do this out for local. Now I want to do it for any stakeholder. And so we spent a lot of time making sure both the software, but also the methodologies work for any stakeholder that could be out there. We've even gone so far as to do a little bit of work around mom bloggers for a company. So lots of opportunity that comes in. Awesome. So, and then next question that comes up here, besides seeing a member on the floor at a hearing or checking in with staff, what tools can be used to monitor who and what extent or which advocates or detractors are speaking in support of or against our issues? This is a really great question and goes into what are other ways that you can be looking at and adding additional information onto the success of your engagement efforts. The biggest piece of advice here is that you've got to be monitoring what's happening on social and what's happening online. And so that means, what is a legislator saying in their tweets? What is a legislator saying on Facebook? Some really interesting stats. There's about 7,300 state legislators out there. 50% of them are on Twitter and 75% are on Facebook. They're talking about these issues all the time. Obviously, in the US Congress, people are going to the floor, the House or Senate. They're making statements. They're making statements in committee hearings. They're putting out press releases, email newsletters, dear colleague letters. And so what you can do is you can take all of those individual metrics and be able to put them side by side with their meeting information. And that honestly is one of the biggest differentiators at Quorum from all of our competitors, is we by far are tracking more data sources than anyone else. And the reason for that is that we know it's really important that you catch those mentions, because either it's an opportunity for you to prove return on investment, or it's an opportunity where you know there's a problem and there should be a chance to follow up. And so a really interesting case study of this, we work with the Uber team, and they've done a case study that's on our website about how they're able to get information much faster than both before their executives get it and even before their consultants get it from the social media monitoring. And then they can go forward that along to their team, to their executives, their comms team, their consultants, and be ahead and on top of issues in a way that they weren't able to before. So that's a really important part of it. Next question, loving it. These are great questions, keep them coming. Can your meeting tracking feature feed into a lobbying disclosure filing? So the answer on this is yes. We've got a mobile app. You log your meetings in the mobile app. And the ability that you can do here is actually download a master spreadsheet of all of your meetings that then you can send to whoever does your lobbying disclosure reports. It's a little bit of a dream come true. Because in that you can tag, I met with this member on this issue, on this bill at this time, and if you want to be as specific for how long. And the follow-up application that gets really interesting on this is that you can start to dive into the amount of time that you're actually spend lobbying and what's the activity that you're doing lobbying. So we work with a couple of nonprofits that are very cautious about the 20% threshold, where they don't want to spend more than 20% of their time lobbying. And obviously, those of you in the corporate world know that lobbying is not a tax-deductible expense. So some corporations choose to write off 100% of their advocacy efforts. Others try and break it out by time. But in the definition of lobbying, lobbying is where it comes in where you're advocating on a specific piece of legislation. But if you're only going in to introduce yourself or introduce the company or do education, that's education work, not technically lobbying by the definition of the statute. And so we'll see teams actually go in and be able to separate out what the meetings are, and then for their lobbying disclosure reports, make very clear what's an educational meeting versus what's an actual lobbying meeting, and use the system to report on that and make the lobbying disclosure filings much easier. An important thing just to highlight here, we don't actually do the lobbying disclosure filings for you at Quorum, but whoever the team is that you're doing it will find it so much easier if you are tracking and putting meetings into a centralized system. Next question, you said that S&P Global created their effectiveness score for correlating engagement with legislative activity. I know that you probably can't share S&P's scoring formula, but can you provide a template for what a formula might look like or what possible factors might be within that score? So certainly can't share S&P's formula. Obviously would refer you to the case study. I think there's a lot of really interesting kind of in-depth there. The effectiveness score that I was talking about actually comes from a nonprofit client of ours who is starting to look at, okay, a whole series of items that might go into a given outcome, and did a legislator actually move an item forward that they were interested in? So in that, couple of things. One, simply voting records. Very easy. Did they vote yes or no on your bill? Follow up, co-sponsorship. Did they sign on to the piece of legislation? Did they not? Did they make a statement on the floor? Real basic. Did they talk about the issue on the floor? That's an easy ask. If somebody's going to be a champion of, hey, would you be willing to go make a couple of remarks on the floor of the House or the Senate about this? Even easier, would you be willing to put out a press release? Would you be willing to mention us in your email newsletter and share our resource? Or even easier, could you send out a tweet or a Facebook post or an Instagram message? Instagram is kind of one of the new bigger areas, 293 members of Congress on Instagram. And what you can do is you can put different weighting on each of those, realizing that if they're sponsoring the bill might be worth more. If they co-sponsor, and it's more than a tweet, in the same way that a floor statement might be more than just a mention in an email newsletter. But when you pull all those together, very easy to put together an effectiveness score. Obviously, you can do this by hand in Excel. It's a big pain, but certainly a possibility. And so we've built an online sheet system in Quorum that can actually auto-populate all the information in, then let you assign weightings to different columns and be able to put together one central effectiveness score that you are the determinant of how effective they are. And it's really exciting to see what some people do on the back end. Because I think you can start to see some awesome outcomes from it, and also some surprises of where there's areas for improvement. Next question. Lobbying has been mostly an in-person activity. Now is the COVID and post-COVID era. How can Quorum help as lobbying is going to become much less in person? So great question. We're actually working on a whole series of content that we're going to share on this and dive even more in depth about what it's going to look like over the next year when you might not be able to go meet with legislators. I'll give the 5 quick things so you have the quick notes version of it, but certainly my entire team is well briefed on this and happy to talk more about it. First thing, you got to be tracking social media. If you're not going to be able to engage on a Capitol Hill or in a state legislature, you got to be engaging online, and you need to know what legislators are saying and when. And that's part of the reason why we've made such an effort in social media tracking over the last 5 years, but it's more essential than ever. 2, you should be creating a policy Twitter account. So the Public Affairs Council's got a great list of different policy Twitter accounts. We've got a blog post on our website from @ToyotaPolicy about the thinking that went into their policy Twitter account, because you want to find an opportunity for your company's brand to be engaging with those legislators' social media posts, and you want to share out your own thing so that you can get on those legislators' feeds, because they, just like you, are sitting at home looking for information and looking for ways to engage. 3rd is email communication, and doing mass email communication is more important than ever. You've spent so much time over your career building all these relationships, meeting all these people, and now in our new world, you're not going to be able to go see them in a Capitol. You're not going to see them at NCSL. They're not going to be at the convenings, Senate President's Forum, whatever it may be. And so given that, it is more important than ever that you're in their inboxes, letting them know what's happening with your company and the good work that your company is doing. And so we've got an outbox tool to help with that, but email is key. 4th, policy reputation calendar. You should have a strategy across your entire team of what you're communicating and when. You got to break through the noise. You're not going to be able to do it in person. And so being able to say, hey, here's our corporate social responsibility report. We're going to send that out on Earth Day so everyone knows what we're doing. Or, hey, let's talk about the fact that we're hiring. Let's make sure that we get legislators tweeting about the fact that we have open jobs in their community. Or, hey, we're restarting our manufacturing here. We want to make sure you know about our commitment to the community. And then last one is grassroots advocacy. So important is going to be, again, to be able to push communications to legislators, make sure they know their constituents still care. And people are sitting at home. And so not only have acquisition costs gone down because people are spending way more time on social, people also want to be engaged. They're looking for things to do. And so it's an awesome time to start a grassroots advocacy program, whether that's just for your employees or more broader. So happy to talk more in depth, but that's the very quick highlights answer. Last question that we have, so if you've got any more, throw them in, is I can understand why you started with quantity measures, number 1. I'm assuming that based on your experiences, you structured the presentation to correlate with what will probably be most important to government relations clients. I could see number 2 and number 3 as being subsets or lead-ins to your number 1. Thanks for a great presentation. So obviously appreciate the compliments. As I think you've seen in the chat, we are recording this. And so if you want a recording, we'll do a quick poll question at the end, and we'll also send the recording of the webinar out as well with a presentation. In terms of the breakdown, the reason why we did is the 1 is the most obvious for clarity, but is the one that we see clients having the hardest time doing because it is so difficult to get the business metrics from the business. So in the event that you can do it, awesome. So clear, resonates well. People love it. The team's fired up because they go and say, I saved the business $20 million this year, or we created $30 million of new economic opportunity. But that being said, I mean, I have seen probably less than 10 businesses actually be able to super effectively do it. And so the other items are really meant of 2, 3, and 4 being the ones that we're honestly seeing more frequently, where people are either reporting on those legislative outcomes or doing stakeholder scoring or doing an advanced version of meeting tracking. And if you can bring all three together, it's not that hard to do all three when you're using a central system to put information in. You can start to get some amazing reporting that comes out. And then suddenly you have all these metrics that you're able to go and prove the return on investment of your organization. So really effective way to be able to dive in. I'm just quickly checking the chat here to make sure that we don't have any questions. Somebody did ask here about differences for trade associations for nonprofits. For those of you that are coming from those backgrounds, you can use these same approaches. The dollars and cents piece of it, number one, is not going to work as well from I saved the nonprofit X amount of money, or I saved all of our member companies Y, because a member company is going to have a lot harder time being able to give you the specific number. But certainly 2, 3, and 4, you can do as a trade association, as a nonprofit, and make it work as well. So really important to be able to use that. Next question that we just got in the chat is, do you recommend classifying meetings as positive, neutral, negative using a custom field in notes? So yes, that is how specifically in the quorum system we would do it. We've built a very robust custom fields system so that you can set up a custom field for positive, neutral, or negative. We also have our issues management system, so you can tag by issue. We'll see people who will use it to tag stakeholders, but that's exactly how you would do this for those of you on this webinar that already are quorum clients. And then, is there any mechanism to help champions become your ambassadors towards other neutrals or detractors? Absolutely. So where we started Quorum was based on looking at who members of Congress worked with most frequently. And we have those same analytics for about half of the state legislatures where there's really good voting and co-sponsorship data. And what we're able to do from an analytics standpoint is give you a search interface so that you can put in a legislator's name and see who they work with most frequently. And then you can start to think about sheets of put all your detractors in and figure out who they work with most frequently and whether or not those individuals are already champions. And then you can go and actually use that to say, hey, so-and-so, would you be willing to go talk to Bob and let him know that we're really actually doing good work in your district and that we would appreciate his help on why? So that's some of the start of really exciting things that you can do of, okay, how do you move the needle on someone and be able to really push them from a champion or from a detractor to neutral or a detractor to a champion. But you can't do that if you don't do the scoring at the beginning. And it also goes to a little bit of just goals. One of the things that business research has found is that if you give someone a goal or a measurement, they're way more likely to go and succeed it. In the same way that if you give your team a challenge of, hey, look at all these detractors, what can we go do to change their minds? You're going to be really surprised at the outcome that's going to come. So those are all the questions that we have. Have really appreciated you all joining us today. Would ask you fill out the quick survey that we're going to launch right here and let us know how this went. And for those of you that fill out the survey, we'll make sure to send both the recording of this webinar as well as make sure to send you the actual presentation itself. And our team is happy to talk with you more in depth about what this would look like as it would apply to your organization and do a personal consultation if it's something that you'd be interested in, as well as also happy to talk with you about how to increase your digital advocacy strategies as it relates to COVID-19 in a world where we might not be able to do as much in-person advocacy over the next year. So with that, thank you all so much for joining. It's been a true pleasure. And the only thing I'll end on is if there's anything that I missed, or if you've got a strategy that you think that we should be presenting or knowing about, my email is just alex@quorum.us. Feel free to send me a note. Would certainly love to hear from you as well. So thank you for your time today. And I hope you have a great rest of your afternoon.